Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's council meeting for February the 25th, 2019, 6 p.m. If we could all stand for the opening prayer, please, and acknowledgement. Lord, we ask that you guide us in our decision-making, protect us and the community we serve from all that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today. Pay my respects to the elders both past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. CM2, recording and webcasting of the meeting. This council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you are respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations received by the Chair. I've received a number of those tonight, and the first one is from Councillor Murray King. The item is CM 13.5. It's a pecuniary significant. I have a professional relationship with a tenderer. His action is he'll leave the chamber. That's items 13.5. Councillor Murray King, pecuniary significant, professional relationship with a tenderer. CM 13.6. Action is leave the chamber. Mr Finlayson, non-pecuniary, less than significant, primary residence is in the vicinity of the Albury Showground. CM 13.2, the Albury Showground planning proposal. Action is declare the nature of the conflict of interest and remain in attendance at the meeting. Councillor Vanderven, non-pecuniary, less than significant. I'm a member of the Albury Showgrounds Land Management Committee. CM 13.2, Albury Showground Planning Proposal, 25/2/19, leave the chamber is the action. Councillor Glacken, non-pecuniary, less than significant. Family member is an ordinary member of the Show Society. It is the CM 13.2, the Albury Showground Planning Proposal. The action is to participate in voting, meeting and vote accordingly. And the last one is from myself, and it is non-pecuniary significant. The description is, my brother is a CEO of the WAW Credit Union. The item is CM 9.1, Finance Policy, and the action is leave the chamber. Mr Zachnich.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. This advice relates to disclosure of political donations and requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. The Act under Section 147 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on Council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 79C1 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report, detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the Council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of Council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 2A of Part 6 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. Apologies, thanks, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillors Doxy and Cameron and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second that.
Thank you. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. There is no Merrill Minute. Action Plan CM6. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Conn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Happy to move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress. And 4, the long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you, Councillor Con. And we have Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, did you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
I have a question from Councillor Glacken. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. CM 6.3, actions in progress. I'm aware, page 11 on our document, the Aquatics Advisory Committee, I'm aware that some consultation has taken place with Wodonga. Can I get a timeframe as to how quickly we will be discussing this as a council, whether in a workshop, update, briefing, in whatever format? Thank you.
Ms Code.
I will have to take that on notice.
That's fine. If we can get an update at some stage, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to provide an update at some stage, Ms Code.
I am.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, Councillor Con, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you.
Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting held on Monday, the 11th of February 2019. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, the 11th of February 2019 at 6:38 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to raise anything?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no question or debate, I'm happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. There are no reports from community forums. CM 9.1, notice of motion, proposed amendment to Council's investment policy and procedure. I will now leave the chamber. Thank you, Councillor Con.
Councillor King.
Yes, that the council resolved to amend the council investment policy and procedure to 1, place 10% of council investments, in brackets cash deposits, into Hume Bank. 2, place 10% of council investments, brackets cash deposits, close brackets, into WAW Credit Union. 3, place 10% of council investments, brackets cash deposits, close brackets, into Bendigo Bank. 4, these amounts be from the council investments, brackets cash deposits, close brackets, held with National Australia Bank, ANZ Bank and Westpac Bank. And 5, maintain the 10% level at all times with Hume Bank, WAW and Bendigo Bank, having regard to fluctuations in investment balances.
Thank you, Councillor King. I'll need a seconder for that motion. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second the motion, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor King, would you like to open debate on that item?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Firstly, this motion relates to the council's local, I believe, to the local procurement policy. I think we need to extend that to the financial institutions in town and show them the support. The 3 institutions that I have nominated are locally based. They provide their branches in the regions. They predominantly supply finance to local businesses and home lenders in their local area. We have a local procurement policy, again, that I think tends to go down the path of awarding tenders to local cleaners and other type of businesses. However, this needs to be a whole of council approach when it comes to be supporting the local people. There's no other organisation in Albury that is more community based than the council.
we need to be leading the way in the way that we support local businesses and our constituents and our residents and our ratepayers in everything that we do. And I think that showing that we support these three local banks and putting our money where our mouth is, it may have a flow-on effect from certainly other businesses in Albury, but it may also get a bit of groundswell with other councils that may see that the way that we do it, and if we can plough the way and overcome some hurdles in relation to things like T Corp, then they may follow, and this is good for regional Australia. Secondly, that again, there's no secret that I'm very scathing of the banks that appeared at the Royal Commission. The three banks that I've nominated here have closed branches in Albury, Corryong, Corowa, Berrigan, Benalla, and certainly in other places that are outside our local demographic. And this is not a sign of supporting regional Australia. This is the complete opposite. So I think we need to send a strong regional message to these banks that if you don't support us, we won't support you. And by closing local branches is not a way to capture our support. So I'm hoping this initiative gets up. I appreciate that there are some logistic and policy things that have to be done, and hopefully the General Manager will deal with that. This is more of a macroscopic proposal in regards to local procurement, and I understand that there may be points 4 and 5 need further fleshing out, but certainly the top three are my motion.
Thanks, Councillor King. Before we have a speaker against, I've got a couple of questions. Councillor Vanderven.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I want to speak against the motion as it is. I want to move some amendments, but I also have a question because I'm a bit confused. I thought we were talking about Hume Bank and WAW Credit Union, who are based here. The organisations are based here, but the Bendigo Bank, whilst it has a branch, is not based here. And I would be uncomfortable having item 3 on this list. Can somebody confirm that they have the same status as Hume Bank and WAW being headquartered and actually run from this regional centre?
Sorry, is your question for Councillor King or for the staff?
Oh, no, for anyone staff that might be able to answer the question.
All right. Mr Finlayson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. While the Bendigo Bank doesn't have its head office within our region, with respect to local economic benefit, they do have a community grant program where a proportion of the amount invested does go directly to supporting the local community. So that's something that council officers have regard to when making investment decisions.
Thank you. Just a follow-up. In terms of the size of the organisations, how many people would be employed by Hume Bank locally, WAW Credit Union locally, and Bendigo Bank locally?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, we don't have that information at hand. However, it could be followed up if required.
That's the questions.
Okay. I do have
Mayor,
questions from another councillor, so I'm happy to do all the questions and come back to you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. My question is to the relevant member of staff. It has been stated to me in an email from the General Manager that if we go ahead with this this idea, then it is possible that we may have increased borrowing costs in the order of $200,000 per year over the next 10 years. I'd like to gain an understanding of where the number of $200,000 per year comes from and how it is derived, and whether there's any strategies for us to try and get around that.
Mr. Finlayson?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, the amount of 200,000 is a comparison of the interest expense on loans budgeted to be borrowed over the next 10 years based on rates that are available from T Corp in comparison to our understanding of the interest rates that are available through the major banks. And so that amount of 200,000 is an average of the difference annually over that 10-year period. Currently, AlburyCity has a loan application before T Corp for a loan facility of around $14.5 million for the current financial year to support our capital works program. T Corp have previously expressed concern regarding the level of investments that AlburyCity policy allows with unrated institutions. AlburyCity has undertaken advocacy efforts to the state government and other parties, including now through LGNSW, who has also done the same. T Corp's credit committee, who has met and considered AlburyCity's loan application, has not yet made a determination of what financial covenants would be included in the proposed loan facility. They will meet again in 1 month's time, which provides AlburyCity the opportunity to provide some answers to some questions they had and to provide some further background of the justification of AlburyCity's investment policy.
Thank you, Mr. Finlayson. I've got another question from Councillor Vanderven.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm just wondering whether, as this council, I think in the past, and especially myself and Councillor Kim have expressed disgust at the holding to ransom of the council as far as our investment policy is concerned, by saying that unless we get rid of these investments with non-rated institutions, we're not going to be able to have access to the T Corp loan funds. Are we going to be included in the further questions and advocacy for our policies with the latest or series of emails from T Corp?
Mr. Finlayson?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, my intention was to provide the information that's already been provided to Council as part of our most recent investment policy review, highlighting the background to both the Hume Bank and WAW and their performance over the last 10 years, including through the GFC, and how their growth has been stable and constant, and how AlburyCity's portfolio compares to other regional cities.
Can I just have a follow-up, Deputy Mayor? In your considered opinion, can I ask you, Mr. Finlayson, if we would be well served to place this particular motion on hold for a month to wait the outcome of the T-Corps deliberations, on the basis that this might be seen to be poking the bear, even though I'd love to do it?
Mr. Finlayson?
Surely Mr. Finlayson can't comment on whether a motion should be deferred or delayed. Well, the question said...
Sorry, Councillor Soley, if Mr. Finlayson doesn't want to answer the question, I believe he has that option.
Through Madam Deputy Mayor, my view is this provides AlburyCity an opportunity to provide further background supporting the case for investing in local institutions. Whether AlburyCity determines to change its policy between now and then, I don't believe that'll sway T Corp in their view of what they see as an appropriate practice. There has been some recent staffing changes within the local government branch of T Corp, so there may be an opportunity for a fresh look at of the information that was being published in the prior financial year. T Corp may show some flexibility, but I'm not sure if they'll go as far as what perhaps we as a council would like to go. And so there is options regarding scenario planning in terms of what our investment policy could look like, or alternatively, we could wait for the determination by the T Corp Credit Committee before determining what steps to take.
Thanks, Mr Finlayson. I have no further questions from councillors, so we'll now have a speaker against the motion. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Deputy Mayor. I actually sympathise and in support of the spirit of this motion. However, I can't support it. There are a number of reasons why. We first of all have hanging over us the T Corp business. That if we invest with these smaller institutions, we will not be able to get access to T Corp loans at a lower rate. Now, Councillor King was quoted in the paper, and I don't know whether I should ask Councillor King whether he got it right, or Mr Johnson whether he got it right. Councillor King was quoted as saying that the motion has been approved by the General Manager, so on that basis he believes it will meet T Corp guidelines. That is completely incorrect as far as I'm concerned. At the moment, T Corp guidelines say that if we invest with these institutions, we will not get access to their loans. In the same article in the paper, Councillor Vanderven said we should be thumbing our nose at the New South Wales Government and Treasury, and he'll fight to the death. Well, I think we should say to our ratepayers, are you happy that we pay $200,000 per annum extra in interest charges if we do this? I'm certainly on the same side as Councillor King with regard to the behaviour of the big banks. I don't think there'd be too many people in the community who wouldn't be on the same, feel the same. But that's different to what we are doing here as a council with council and ratepayers' money. I don't believe, and we already have a policy, by the way, that allows us to invest up to 10% with each of these institutions. We don't for a number of reasons. The Bendigo Bank, for example, was given a downgrading by Standard & Poor's, and we reduced our investments with them on that basis. I note that Mr Finlayson has told us that Bendigo Bank does provide a community benefit based on the holdings they have, and that's a big plus, and I'd like to be able to go back there. But my view is that this is the wrong time for this motion because of the T Corp issue. And it's all very well to say we should thumb our nose and someone will fight to the death. If T Corp say that this is their final policy, then council can make an informed decision. We can thumb our nose at them then when we know, and we tell our ratepayers that we're going to take an option that gives you $200,000 extra costs per year. So I support the spirit of the motion, but
sorry, is it 200,000 a year or is it 200,000 over 10 years?
Sorry, is that a point of order or a question? We'll wait to the end of Councillor Thurley's debate. Thanks.
If you read the email from the General Manager, it's 200,000 per annum for 10 years, every year for 10 years. That's my reading of it. So I can't support this motion right now. I support it in principle. I like the sentiment, but we need to find out really what the situation is with T Corp and then make a decision based on that, not based on some bank bashing or other thing right now. So I will vote against the motion as it presently stands. But if this motion were to come back to me in a few months when T Corp's position was clear, then I could very easily vote for such a motion.
Thanks, Councillor Thurley. Councillor King, did you want to ask your question now?
No, Councillor Thurley's answered.
We don't have any speakers for, so we can have another speaker against the motion. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you, and I do acknowledge your offering me that opportunity. I do agree with the sentiment as well as Councillor Thurley and a number of other councillors around the table. However, this is not the way in which we should be dealing with it. The Local Government Act states quite clearly that we are to ensure that we achieve the maximum benefit for our community, and that includes financial benefit as well. This policy, or this motion put up tonight, which really isn't a policy, it's simply a one-off change to investments, would be detrimental to our residents because it would directly affect council. And it would directly affect council because it's a one-off change. It doesn't look at the bigger picture, the longer term, and the interrelationships. We need to deal with this issue as part of the review of investments, as we do on a very regular basis. So this needs to be part of that discussion so that it's not a one-off change to the percentages. All sorts of factors change as we go through time. This is a shooting from the hip, one-off change to what is a holistic policy that deals with a number of other factors, not just what's being presented to us tonight. We also have the complications of T Corp and the related issues with that, including the potential for such a policy or such a motion being put forward tonight being a very expensive option for our community. I'm very happy for us to review the components that relate to this within our investment policy, and I'm mindful that we did so with regards to green investments, as one might term them, green investments. We factored that in, and that is reported to us on a very regular basis. So I'm very happy for us to review this, the sentiment of this, as part of the overall review to our funding policy. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Deputy Mayor. Acting Chair.
Councillor Glacken, we still don't have any speakers for the motion, so I'll allow one more against. Councillor Van Diven.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Look, I will vote against this. I would like to move an amendment, but as it appears that this might get defeated, my notice of my amendment would be around the fact that we really need to ensure that, and I indicated this before, need to be around the fact that the interest from these investments would need to be competitive with the other institutions, and that's the only reason that we do this now, is because those investments are competitive. I do have a question, if I could ask that question, Madam Deputy Mayor. Does the current policy from T Corp require us to divest ourselves of our investments with these institutions, Hume Bank, WAW and Bendigo, or are they allowing us to keep those and not increase them in view, and are they threatening to not provide us with the loan funding if we don't divest?
Mr Finlayson.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, previous discussions around June last year, when the policy position of T Corp became known to Council, the framework which they're promoting to local governments recommends that councils don't invest any more than the government guarantee with unrated institutions such as the Hume Bank and WAW. In our discussions at the time, their preference was, if council was to make an application, they would prefer that council pull back on the amount invested with WAW because of its relative size to the Hume Bank. So, for example, we have around, I think, $4.5 million currently with WAW. They'll prefer that was around $2 million as a sign of moving in the direction of the framework that they want councils to work towards. In terms of what actual covenants they will require us to abide by in this loan application before T Corp, that's still to be determined by the T Corp Credit Committee.
Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor. I've got a sense of where that's sitting. On the basis of the fact that this motion doesn't cover the issue of competitive interest rates, I'm happy to not vote for this tonight, but obviously I think all of my words have been around the fact that we need to be fighting to the death the T Corp's attitude about investing in what we see as very much homegrown institutions. And but that doesn't mean that we need to ignore the interest rates, because if we have this policy here in bank and say, oh, we'll give you 1.5%, we'd be forced to place 10% of our investments with them on the basis of this motion. So I again have great sympathy for the motion. I think prudence, it would be prudent to defeat this motion at this time, and it gives us a chance to have a look at what TCOB comes back with and revisit the issue in a month, 6 weeks' time. Thanks, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Vanderven. I've now got an indication of another speaker against, so we'll all have a say tonight. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Look, when I first saw this notice of motion, I liked it. The major banks have hardly covered themselves in glory recently. We have always, in the life of this particular council, strongly supported local businesses, but there's really too much at stake here. 200,000 a year over 10 years is 2 million. We can do a lot of projects for 2 million. I think we need to look more carefully into this, and I think I am voting against it, but I'm really suggesting that we just delay this until we find out a bit more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Look, there are no more speakers for or against. I have my own question to Mr Finlayson, please, which is, when are we expecting to get a verdict from T Corp?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The T Corp Credit Committee meets again on the 28th of March.
Thank you. Councillors will indulge me to make my own comments on this motion. Look, I completely agree with the intention of the motion. I think that Councillor King is trying to support our local institutions, and that's something that we've done repeatedly in this term of council. It's obviously a complex situation, and it looks like this motion isn't going to pass tonight. I'd like to foreshadow an alternate motion, should this motion fail, that will hopefully be an appropriate compromise. Councillor King, would you like to close debate?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I've taken on board all the comments by my fellow councillors. Again, it was certainly raised with the view that that these things would come out. I did have a long, hard think about it and didn't shoot from the hip. But I sort of go down the path of the supporting local business thing. And again, I would be the first one to say, if we're going to burn $200,000 a year, it's probably not a good thing. But again, I'll pick up on the word, I think Mr Finlay said, a potential scenario. I don't think that's locked in, and I think with negotiation with a lot of these institutions, that might be something that's certainly able to be reined in, if at all, and certainly that their rates that they have with our balances are competitive with the bigger institutions. So, again, I appreciate the expertise of Mr Finlayson saying that, that's the outside, or that's the top of it. Again, it's probably one of those things that needs to be managed by our senior executive, and that amount might not necessarily be there. But anyway, I've taken on board what everyone said, and if it doesn't get up, we may visit it later on when those questions are answered by the financial team.
Thanks, Councillor King. I'll now put the motion. Those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is lost. I'd like to move the alternate motion, please, which is that Council bring forward its scheduled review of our investment policies to April 2019, and in this review include options to increase investment in institutions that benefit our local community. Do you need me to repeat it? Yeah. Sorry, that's that Council bring forward its scheduled review of investment policies to April 2019, and that this review include options to increase investment in institutions that benefit our local community. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Before I open debate, there's a question from Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Just a quick question around when was the next full review of our investment policy due? Annually or biannually?
Mr Zagnich.
Yeah, the policy provides for an annual review, which was to commence in June this year.
Thanks, councillors. Look, I probably don't need to say much about this motion. It's obvious that we'd all like to explore this issue further, and it looks like April's the soonest appropriate point to do that once we have the information from T Corp. And I hope that we can support this motion and have the conversation again in April. And it looks like there are no speakers for or against, so I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? That's carried. And we'll allow Councillor Mack back into the chamber.
It's been moved and seconded. Thank you, councillors. Let the minutes reflect that I've returned to the chamber. CM10, no presentations and deputations. CM11, reports and minutes of committees and working parties. CM11.1. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive, note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Local Traffic Committee meeting held on Thursday, 7th of February 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to speak to that motion?
I'm tempted, but no. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. There being no further question or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM12, there are no documents for sealing. CM13.1, draft asbestos management policy. Councillor Vandervan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll move that Council A endorse the draft asbestos management policy. B, place the draft asbestos management policy on public display for a minimum period of 28 days. And C, if at the conclusion of the exhibition period no submissions are received formally, adopt the draft asbestos management plan and procedure and include the policy in the public policy register.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to that?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, it's a really serious issue in our community, obviously has been for some time, and the way that it's been handled by the Department of Local Government is also, they could also take a leaf out of their own book and do the same sort of good work on other policies. But anyway, it is important to maintain the safety of our community from asbestos, and I think this is a good policy.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM 13.2, Albury Showground Planning Proposal. Minutes reflect that Councillor Vandervan is leaving the chamber. Thank you, councillors. Could I have a mover for the motion, please? Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A endorse the planning proposal and forward it to the Minister for Planning seeking an amendment to the ALEP 2010 and request that a gateway determination be issued including the delegation of plan-making powers so as to enable the public exhibition of the planning proposal pursuant to the EP&A Act 1979. B, upon receipt of a gateway determination under section 3.34 of the EP&A Act 1979, Council place the planning proposal and any supporting material on public exhibition pursuant to any requirements of the gateway determination and Schedule 1, Clause 4 of the EP&A Act 1979, and C, should no objections be received, furnish a copy of this report and other relevant information to the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment and or New South Wales Parliamentary Council's Office in accordance with the EP&A Act 1979 and request the Minister for Planning or a delegate on his behalf undertake the appropriate actions to secure the making of the amendment to the ALEP 2010.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
The easy part. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to open debate? Have you got your breath back?
I will very briefly state, for the purposes of brevity, that in my view as a resident and ratepayer of this local government area, the showgrounds could be a lot better than they are. They need some extravagant changes made to them, both in terms of how it is zoned and what they're used for and what can and cannot be done in them. This is the very early stages of all of that. I think that the real debate will happen once the gateway determination and other information comes back from the state government. But something definitely needs to be done with that area, that very important area of this city, and this is just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. I have a question from Councillor Glacken. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you to the most relevant member of staff, can I just confirm that should we not specify in A that it is endorse the planning proposal for whatever it is? It's in no section there. Can I read that we're specific? I know the motion relates to this report, but should we not at least put the purpose? Yeah.
Location.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Weekend.
Thank you very much.
So, Mrs. Atkins, would you include that in the motion? You comfortable with that, Councillor Stutchbury?
Yes, and we also remove there from those brackets in the last line and replace it with a his, or will Councillor Con object to that?
No, she doesn't object. Councillor Thill, are you comfortable with that change?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you for that. So there is no further discussion or debate. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
So we have a division. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken and Councillor Thurley. Those against? No one against. The motion is carried. If we could get Councillor Vanderman back in, please. Thank you. Let the minutes reflect that Councillor Vanderman has returned to the chamber. We have 13.3, the December quarter budget review. Thank you, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion from page 57 that Council A receive and adopt the revised budget estimates for the 2018-19 financial year, and B note the supplementary reports including the consultancy and legal expenditure and contract expenditure listing.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Glucken, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor King, you have a question?
Just on the question of the capital budget on page 53, the capital budget net of capital income, sorry, it's a relevant member of staff, to decrease by 654,959 million to 500 and... Is that a correct figure?
Through you, Mr Mayor, it doesn't sound like a correct figure.
Councillor
Bank.
King? Pardon?
Put that in the human bank, couldn't we?
Thanks, Councillor King. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
It's worthy of note that once again we're projecting an operating surplus, and in fact the surplus is higher than that projected at the beginning of the year. So I guess it reflects on good performance of the staff and all of the projects we're doing.
Thank you. So, Councillor Glucken, no speakers for or against. Did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you.
On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 13.4, the drainage construction Ross Circuit and Belston Street drains contract. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council accepts the tender from Hutchinson Civil Proprietary Limited for contract number 18/02859, Ross Circuit Drain and Bolston Street Drain reconstruction in the lump sum amount of $587,394.50, including GST.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second that motion, Mr Mayor.
Oh, stand by. Councillor King hasn't left the chamber yet, Councillor Stutchbury. Hey? Councillor Stutchbury, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's little to say regarding this tender, except to say that I was a little bit surprised to find that we still have open drains in our city in the 21st century, and I fully agree with the author's statement that these open drains are dangerous for children and probably adults as well, and unsightly, and anything that we can do to get rid of them and replace them with closed drains has got to be a good idea, and this would appear to be a competitive tender.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. It could be a departure from the Roman days when they were open. So, on that note, there are no other quick questions or debate. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Whilst Councillor King has left the building, we will deal with 13.5, which he has also declared an interest. Tabletop Road Water Main Augmentation. Councillor Glucken.
Thank you. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that Council accepts the tender from Hurst Moving Proprietary Limited for contract number 18/01730, Tabletop Road Water Main Augmentation from Thurgoona Drive to Brooklyn Drive for the lump sum of $461,135.68, including GST. And I think
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Glucken, do you wish to speak to that?
It, again, is another good opportunity for Council to progress works for our area, and clearly the water main augmentation is a significant project.
Thank you. No further question or debate. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. If we can get Councillor King back in, that'd be fantastic. No, there's no recommendation. It's not to accept any tender. He still should be sitting in front. Yeah, thought the same thing. Councillor Clacken?
Thank you. Oh, no, sorry, I had a question that I had recorded on my documentation. It's now disappeared, but it's not urgent and it wasn't pertinent to the decision, so I'll ask it outside of the meeting. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We're up to 13.6, Welga Road Beautification Stage 2A. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does Councillor...
I think he's leaving again. Okay.
No, he
There's
might have-
three. All right, Councillor Stutchbury, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, but I'm going to wait for the door to be shut because I'm concerned about his conflict of
isn't he,
interest.
Mr Terry?
Yeah.
He's moving now.
Okay, away you go.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A not accept any tender for contract number 18/02566 Wagga Road Stage 2A, and B, invite open tenders for a combined Wagga Road Stage 2A and Stage 2B project.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley?
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to that?
Very briefly, I think this is a pretty straightforward thing. The lowest cost tender looked like they may not have been able to complete the project the way we would like it to be, and the other tender was a bit too high, and then some further funding came through which gave us the option of combining two projects, so it's a bit of a no-brainer, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We finally retrieve Councillor King, please. I don't think he's got a declaration for this one.
So that's the main thing. It'll be recorded in the minutes.
Thank you, councillors. Let the records reflect that Councillor King has returned to the chamber. 13.7, Development Application 10.2018.36213.1. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Con.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant development consent to development application 10.2018.36213.1, proposing construction of a 3-storey residential flat building comprising 4 residential apartments, associated car park and facilities at 690 Dean Street, Albury, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included as attachment 5 to this report.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Con, I just have a question from a councillor. Are you happy for me to take it? Councillor Glacken, you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, Mr Mayor. To the most relevant member of staff, regretfully, the notes that I had made when reading reports yesterday have disappeared. And it's a large report. I do recall that somewhere in the report that it indicates that there was a previously approved development on this actual site, similar but not the same. And my memory is that the previous development was higher. Can I confirm, please, with the most relevant member of staff, that the footprint is the same, or is it different? And if, whether it's different or the same, what is the general effect of the shadowing now versus the previously approved development? And then my second question is, there are screens indicated in one of the attachments that appear to be parallel with the ground out from the windows. Can someone explain how they work, please?
Thank you. Mr Keys, did you get both those questions?
I hope so, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the questions, and through you, Mr Mayor, try and offer a response. Without being exact and precise, I'd have to take on notice the question around the footprint. I believe it's very similar. The setbacks actually, I think, were increased, and that was in response to previous concerns that were raised. The screens that are provided are deliberately designed to protect the private open space of neighbouring dwellings, recognising and having gone into consultation with those neighbours about what areas that they are trying to protect and would like protected. They are deliberately designed to allow, still enable views to the west, Monument Hill and the like, but to prevent direct viewing down into those private areas in the rear of their adjoining dwelling.
Can I have a follow-up, please?
Yes, you may.
Yeah.
Councillor
Thank you.
Parker.
So those screens are fixed in position, is that correct, or are they movable?
Mrs. Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I believe that they are fixed in position.
All right, and going back to, if I may, to the first question, that was about the footprint and the height of the building and the shadowing. I can only imagine that the shadowing is less now than it would have been with the previous development, noting that the previous development was at least 1 floor higher, is my recollection.
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the shadowing is primarily in the morning up until lunchtime because of the direct northerly aspect of the adjoining private open space and this building. So the shadow cast at midday affects Dean Street, and in the afternoon the other neighbouring dwellings will be protected from the western sun, so they'll have shadowing in the afternoons. They'll still have access to normal sunlight that they've had before in the morning, so it's not a complete overshadowing situation where there is no sunlight available to those open spaces. But you're correct in your observation too that there has been a reduction in the extent of overshadowing.
Thank you.
Comfortable? Thank you. Question from Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question to the relevant member of staff. I read 2 of the submissions that were attached to this report talked about the rear laneway and issues relating to the rear laneway, which appears to be a laneway that runs from Wilcox through to Stanley Street on an L shape. Were those issues addressed? Were those issues in those submissions addressed in the planning report? Because I couldn't find anything in it about the rear laneways.
Mr. Keys.
Through you, Mr Mayor, appreciate the question. I'd have to take that on notice.
Councillor Stutchbury.
All very well to take it on notice, but we're voting on this DA in about 30 seconds or a minute.
So you're...
There were two submissions related to the rear laneway. One was whether there was going to be increased traffic volumes on it, which probably wasn't particularly relevant, but the other one seemed more relevant, which related to the person accessing their garage from the laneway, which was very close to the proposed development.
Mr. Keys, do you have any recollection of that?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I believe previously we have had discussions and concerns raised about traffic in that laneway. We dealt with in considering the access to this development is not proposed to be off the laneway. This development will not directly provide any additional traffic in that laneway area. As to the right of access and ability to access private property, this development does not impose or provide any additional encroachment on the laneway. It may prevent people who were previously accessing private property or utilising the swing area across private property. Given that boundary exists and they're not entitled to cross that, I don't believe there's any further action required.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Con, do you wish to open debate?
Sure. With your permission, Mr Mayor, I'd like to quote from the report because it's one of my favourite sentences from a planning report this term of council. It's noted that the design proposed is unashamedly contemporary and modern in built form and materials and may not be everyone's cup of tea. This development's not my cup of tea, but unfortunately I can't make a planning decision based on my own taste in architecture. Albury's going through a transition from being a country town to a regional city. We have to have medium density residential development close to the CBD. This is a prime location for medium density. I understand that that's always going to create some conflict with the people who've lived in that area for a long time, but I think we have to move forward and I will regretfully vote for this building that's not my cup of tea.
Thank you, Councillor Con. There appears to be no further questions or debates, so we need to have a division on this one. I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack, Councillor Con, Councillor King, Councillor Glacken, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Officers' reports for noting the 14.1 monthly development statistics, January 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics for January 2019 report.
Thank you. Seconded, please. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 14.2, Albury City Operational Plan 2018 to 2019, Albury 2030. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the 2018-2019 operational plan report.
Thank you. Seconded, please. Councillor Glacken.
Happy to second.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to open debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Con, you have a question?
I do, yes, please, Mr Mayor, through to the relevant member of staff, who I believe will be Mr Keys. I note that the environmental planning assessment is well below the service charter compliance and has been for a number of iterations of the operational plan. My question as we move into the budget preparation period is if we need an additional resource to be able to meet those targets.
Mr Ferris. Mr Keys.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you, in response to that question, we do have an additional resource allocated. At this point in time, we haven't been able to recruit successfully to that position, and pending the outcomes of the restructure that's underway, we're not proposing to recruit to that position, but that will certainly be a key role that will assist in driving and promoting improvement in those figures. And that's the Group Leader of Development.
Happy with that, Councillor Con? Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak for this, or have you accidentally pressed your button?
I don't have any lights lit.
Okay. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to close debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.3, the corporate health indicators. Thanks. Councillors? Councillor Vandervan.
I move that Council receive and note the December 2018 Corporate Health Indicators Report.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to that at all?
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, obviously we've already had some discussion around the works program, why it's at where it is, at 38.2%, I think it was at December 30, but anticipating to be by 95% by June 30, 2019. Obviously, the development application processing is heading in the right direction, and we'd like to see that better. But for the most, the results of that of this report in most aspects is very satisfactory. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. There being no further question or debate, I'd just like to clarify something with Mr Ferris. We had a discussion during the week about the completion or the percentage of completion of those projects, and I just wanted to validate that the projects, there are different reasons for those projects being held up, Mr Ferris, and maybe of use to the councillors to understand.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. So our program is all of the projects that are listed for completion during the financial year. That includes some projects that are delivered in-house and externally. It would be fair to say that the majority of the hold-ups have been with some of our large external contract projects where the planning phase has taken longer than expected to work through areas like environmental lands approval or Crown lands or third-party lands has certainly held up the progress on some of those. Some have been referred to other state authorities for feedback and concurrence before we can progress, and they've been held up. So typically it is the larger ones. They have a high weighting obviously because of the price in our matrix we undertake, and they are pulling the percentage down, albeit including tonight's contracts. We've had a number of contracts resolved in February, December and November, so we should see some real gain in those figures over the coming months.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Question from Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. If we did have a discussion about this previously, Mr. Ferris, would you think it'd be more accurate to present to the councillors those projects that are beyond your control to finish, like the environmental lands and Commonwealth, the other state departments that are holding our progress up as an item that then doesn't bring the percentage down and gives us a more accurate figure of our in-house works and external works that may be on track or close to on track, and just not give us a false sense of where we really are?
Mr. Ferris.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. To answer Councillor King's question, we're trying to attack that from two ways. One would be in that preliminary planning stage when we're pulling budgets together like we are now, to be more confident about the turnaround times for some of those projects that are in those areas that need extended consultation and or discussion with other authorities. And then, because they're typically a project that runs over a number of years anyway, and more accurately request allocations of funding accordingly. And in our reporting back to council, we'll attempt to try and split those up a little bit to give councillors a better indication of perhaps the 6 or 8 major projects that are bringing the figure down, and have a little bit of separation between internally delivered versus external product projects.
Thanks, Mr. Ferris. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. The investment balance is 14.4 January 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vanderman.
I'll move that council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of January 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
No, except to note that the 10% is catered for in the last, or the second last, on page 147, related to invest up to 10%, which is interesting, obviously, in light of previous discussions.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you. CM 14.5, the Service and Efficiency Review Program, 1 July to 31 December 2018. Councillor Gleichen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to move the recommendation as a motion that council receive and note the 6-month February 2019 update on the Service and Efficiency Review Program.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gleichen, do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a program that council initiated, the senior staff and councillors initiated a number of years ago. In fact, I think it was probably 6 years ago. It's been a very worthwhile program because it has found efficiencies financially, but it's also found opportunities to enhance service and therefore provide greater efficiencies, not just monetary-wise as well. And so the program has reaped benefit for us as a council. It's allowed our staff to review what they do and how they do it and why they do it, to achieve financial savings, but also to achieve greater outcomes for our community. And I believe we should be congratulating our staff for their ongoing efforts towards this, because it continues to produce a positive outcome for our community. It continues to produce efficiencies, but also changes in the way in which we undertake our practice here at council. So congratulations to the staff for again achieving positive outcomes for our community.
Thank you, Councillor Gleichen. And I'll reiterate those words. Okay, there being no further question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Economic Indicators February 2019 update 14.6. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the release of the Albury Economic Indicators February 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Have a question, Councillor Thurley. Are you happy for me to take the question?
Certainly, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through to the staff best able to answer. On page 156 electronically, the first item, as at November 2018, the Albury-Wodonga LGAs had a combined GRP valued at approximately 6.93 billion. This represents a 615 million or 1% increase, and that doesn't gel.
Mr Finlayson. Who? Miss Squire. Give it your best shot, Miss Squire.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thanks for the question. I believe you're correct, Councillor Vanderven. I don't believe the 1% is the correct figure. But I'll certainly confirm that and check the detail in the report to ensure it is correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Squire. Councillor Glacken wishes to speak for, but I'll take Councillor Thurley to open debate first. Not interested?
Just to indicate that it really does show once again that AlburyCity is a thriving community and lots of activity occurring and all pretty good stuff.
Thank you. Councillor Glacken, do you wish to speak to that?
No, I was simply wanting to either move or second.
Okay, no worries. The light was still on, no
apologise.
problem. Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to it?
Look, I think one of the really telling numbers in this particular report is around employment and the 6.2% increase, which, if correct, is a massive, massive growth in employment opportunities in Albury and goes to say, you know, to confirm what Councillor Thurley's already said, is that we're a thriving and growing community. And it is the number that really best demonstrates that.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have no delegates' reports for noting. I have a notice of urgent business. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This notice of urgent business is around your announced candidacy for the federal seat of Farrer as an independent, and I wish to ensure that the Council's Code of Conduct is adhered to as far as the use of council assets in the electoral process. Now, can I ask a question of staff first, please, Mr Mayor?
Certainly, Mr Councillor Vanderman.
So, with the use of council assets, we visited that policy quite some time ago, but I don't think it was ever envisaged that it would be that we would have a councillor standing for such an important position for election to a federal seat. And as far as the use of council assets is concerned, I don't think the policy addresses the issue of a candidate for any elections.
Yes, Councillor Stutchbury, what's your point of order?
This matter doesn't appear to be either urgent or business, and I move that we close the meeting.
I'm happy to hear the question, Councillor Stutchbury. I think it's relevant to the public arena. Councillor Vanderman, could you continue?
Yeah, well, look, I'll get to the question. Obviously, there was a bit of surrounded, but there is a code of conduct around the private use of council assets, but I have some concerns around the fact that we don't actually mention the electoral process or any standing for any elections in that. And I think I just want to confirm that that is my understanding of the current private use policy.
Mr Zagnich.
Thanks for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. So the Council's current policy relating to councillor payment of expenses and facilities policy talks about use of council assets, including the mayoral vehicle, for example, in terms of private use. The policy provides for such private use in accordance with the Council's motor vehicle policies, and there are provisions there where private use for other than incidental private use is determined by a recorded logbook, and reimbursement of any private fuel in that instance by the in that instance for the mayoral vehicle. So those sorts of provisions are certainly included. The Office of Local Government has, as it does regularly prior to elections, local, state or federal, issues a circular which we've provided to all our councillors late last year and again early this year around use of council resources during elections, where obviously council officials are reminded that use of council resources and the like is not permitted during or for election campaigns. So those provisions, while not directly in council's provision of expenses or facilities policy, are covered in the council's code of conduct and recent circulars issued by the Office of Local Government.
Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich, for that detailed explanation. On the basis of the answer, I will, at our next available opportunity, be moving a notice of motion around more specific use of council assets and to alter our code of practice. So I'm very cognizant of the fact that I think the expectation of our community would be that the Mayor stands aside from his position as Mayor to focus on... Point of order, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury.
Councillor Vanderven really asking you to stand aside as Mayor whilst you campaign for this federal election, and if so, what has it got to do with council? This is not a matter of urgent business. This is not business, and it's certainly not Councillor Vanderven's business. I think that this line of discussion should be ceased forthwith.
I think the discussion, though, Councillor Stutchbury, is probably urgent, given that we are in a council meeting and I'm chairing the meeting, and I do believe that the issue needs to be discussed, as I believe it does impact upon future business of council. Whether it's vindicated or not, I'm happy to hear Councillor Vanderven's thoughts, and I believe it is an urgent matter at this point. But thank you for your concern, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Vanderven, continue.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really appreciate the opportunity to put my thoughts. And the issue for me is that the time is right. And I sent you an email, and I apologise that it did not arrive when I expected it to arrive. But I fully support you standing as is your right to as an independent, and the stars aligned for you to have a real crack at it. My expectation would be that you have a decent crack at it and not do a part-time job and spend the last 6 weeks of the campaign whenever they might call the election. Because whilst you might be well known in the Albury electorate, it's a different matter outside this electorate. We form about 22 or 23% of the voting population of the Farrer electorate. So you've got to make yourself known to the 77%. And if you didn't do that, I believe my advice to you, Mr Mayor, is that you wouldn't be doing yourself a very great service.
Councillor Cohen, you have a point of order.
I don't think a discussion around your election strategy for the seat of Farrer is the business of council.
I agree, it probably isn't, but I think Councillor Vanderven's finished anyway, aren't you, Councillor Vanderven? No?
I think I've made my point, Mr Mayor. I strongly encourage you to take the course of action that I've suggested to you by email and tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you have a question or a comment?
I have a comment. I'd have to say, completely honestly, when I read the Border Mail on Saturday morning, I was disgusted to read a councillor saying, if he is going to do both jobs, I will personally be making sure none of the council's assets, including the mayoral car, are being used. That shows a complete lack of respect for the hard-working mayor we've had for the last few years. And if I could remind Councillor Vanderven of clause 256 of the local government regulation, and I know it's Division 4 keeping order at meetings, but I would use this as my model of behaviour. And it says, a councillor commits an act of disorder if the councillor, D, insults or makes personal reflections or imputes improper motives to any other councillor. He has committed an act of disorder. And it seems to me that what Councillor Vanderven has done, with his quote in the paper, is impugned the motives of our mayor. And I think it doesn't become him and it doesn't become us as councillors. And I think that we all should show better respect for each other than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Councillor King, did you wish to make a comment or discuss?
Yes, I can make a comment. I think Councillor Vanderman needs to say what he means by assets. Obviously, the mayoral cars are an issue, and could he sort of enlighten me what else assets he's talking about?
It's all sorts of assets, iPads, phones, etc.
Councillor King?
What's the etc.? iPad, car, iPad, phone,
Computers, whatever you like.
Biros, council pads.
I think I get the gist of your comment, Councillor King.
I haven't finished yet.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Now, what I also would like to say that I think that the mayor has actually created a problem for himself by the amount of work that he does on behalf of the Albury City Council. I think he's, you know, from what I've seen of the time that I've been here, he's 80 or 90 hour weeks. I've seen such a high benchmark for the duties of mayor, and that someone like Councillor Vanderven saying, well, how are you going to fit the rest of it in, is potentially a backhanded compliment to the amount of work that the mayor does. And I think if the mayor actually cut his workload by half, he would still be exemplary in the amount of commitment that he has to the organisation. So I certainly have no problem with him doing what he's doing and maintaining the role as the Mayor of Albury.
Thank you, Councillor King. There being no further discussion, happy to close the meeting now at 7:23. There is no confidential items for discussion tonight. Thank you.